and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we'll begin with the report of the superintendent. Dr. Byrne.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our third Board of Education meeting of the 2022-2023 school year. I hope everyone had a nice Columbus Day weekend. After all the excitement associated with the game on Saturday, I know I was grateful for an extra day off. I regretfully must report that the Huskies came out on top of the Garnets in the 95th iteration of the game this past Saturday, October 8th. The final score was 22-7, which doesn't truly reflect how hard-fought a game it was. Congratulations to the team, coaches, and parents of the players of both squads. Congratulations also to the winners of this year's Chris Mello Scholarship Award, Owen Myers for Rye and Dylan Haynes for Harrison. The boys are both exemplary student athletes and teammates. I am incredibly proud of our athletes and coaches for their fine display of character at the conclusion of the game when the Harrison fans rushed the field and interrupted the traditional handshake between teams. I also wish to congratulate the cheer squad and the band for their efforts on Saturday. Unfortunately, the cheer squad suffered technical difficulties with their music, but they powered on and performed admirably. I wish to extend my heartfelt thanks for the hard work that went into hosting the game, the first in-person fanfare-filled edition of this storied event since 2019. And just before I left the office this afternoon, I learned that we sold over 5,100 tickets, and all of those people were at Nugent Stadium. I'd like to thank the entire athletics department, Susan Aldana, and the custodians and administrators at Rye High School, the RFA, our event supervisors who have an incredibly challenging job on an event of that magnitude, and the many parent volunteers who put in a ton of effort planning, organizing, orchestrating the game and everything that led up to it, from Spirit Week at the high school to the t-shirt sales, to the pep rally and bonfire Friday night, and to the game itself. A special thank you to Jeff Provenzano, Rye High School class of -- for the spectacular skydiving demonstration. And I know I mentioned the custodians, and between the custodians and the security, who they were all amazing the whole weekend. It's truly a special group of people. And if you haven't seen the videos of the skydiving, Jay Sears posted the videos. I believe it was a drone that was following him out of the helicopter, which was crazy. Our back-to-school nights are completed, and we're now on to our first round of parent-teacher conferences. And these are taking place on October 19th at Rye Middle School and November 17th at the 3 elementary schools. Also complete is the administration of the first round of the NWEA assessments. These assessments are given 3 times a year to students in grades 1 through 8, twice a year to kindergarten, and they are proving to be incredibly helpful in informing classroom instruction in literacy and math, and in meeting the individual needs of our students where they are right now. On October 21st, parents will receive a report with their child's results, and we will be hosting a parent university with Dr. Murray on October 24th to help parents interpret the reports. Now, we know that it's very close to the October 20th Safety and Security Parent University. We hope you come to both. And we are rapidly approaching the October 31st deadline for applications for community members to serve on 2 district committees, facilities and technology. All of the information and applications are posted on the homepage of the district website in the district news section, or please reach out to our public information officer, Sarah Derman. And as always, we deeply appreciate the time and energy of our community is so willing to give these committees and to every facet of our schools. October is National Principals Month, so please join me in thanking our school principals for all they do for our students, parents, teachers, and staff every day. They keep our schools running smoothly and efficiently and provide guidance and aid to all. And at the high school, it's Suzanne Short, Joe DiDevani at the middle school, Jim Boylan at Midland, Annie Piekarski at Milton, and Angela Garcia at Osborne. October is the month we celebrate our school board members. October 17th through 21st is the New York State School Board Association's School Board Recognition Week. And since we do not have a board meeting next week, somehow curiously, we never have a board meeting when we're supposed to recognize you.
We'll have to look into that.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our board trustees for their service. I cannot stress enough how important your work is to the success of our school district, your voluntary work. And this incredible group of people tirelessly provides invaluable support and feedback. And I hope the entire community will join me in thanking these volunteers, because although they are elected, they volunteer their time and talents for their hard work and dedication to our schools. Thank you. And that concludes my report for this evening.
Well, thank you. I'm not surprised to hear about the large number of tickets that were sold, because anyone who was there knows you couldn't find a seat. And to see such great community spirit and support was really a wonderful thing, and we certainly hope that the student athletes felt their community support while they were on the sidelines. Okay, moving on to our presentation and discussion. First, we will have our book talk.
Audit first. Sorry.
Okay. Pause. We will now move to the external audit report. Don't be sorry. That was just how it was.
Thank you all. Thank you all for having me. Because it is our first year, I'm going to do a quick introduction. My name is Justin Wood. I am from Nugent and Hauser PC out of Montgomery, New York, which is up in Orange County. It is our first year here at the district as the external auditors. I've been with the firm for 20 years. I've been a partner for 6. And it's been great to get to know Eric and Gabby and Kathy and everybody else at the district. I do want to thank the board for their service. Also, I want to thank the audit committee members for taking the extra time to join the committee and go over this 85-page document in detail with us last week. I will not bore everybody here with that detail. I'll just do a summary of the information. Please feel free to interrupt me at any point during this discussion with any questions you may have. And I do just want to emphasize what a great job Gabby and Kathy have been doing at the district office, along with their staff as well. Within this document, there are 4 reports, 3 of which have opinions on them. So to go through each report, the first one is the basic financial statements, which takes up about 75 of the 85 pages, or the basic school district financial statements. The opinion on that report is unmodified, or otherwise known as a clean opinion. It's our highest level of assurance that the books and records of the district are free of material misstatement. The one report that is not accompanied by an opinion is the report on internal control over compliance. That is the report where any significant deficiency or material weakness at the district would be reported. I'm happy to report there were none that we reported there. The third report is a report on the single audit under uniform guidance, which is we do a compliance audit on some of the federal grants that the district has received. And in this case, it was related to the stimulus money through the CARES and ARPA funds, the stimulus money. So we reviewed those grants in detail and had, yet again, an unmodified, or otherwise known as clean opinion, our highest level of assurance. And our last but not least report is our report on the student activity clubs, or extra classroom clubs, and again, unmodified, clean, our highest level of assurance. I do just want to point out that the district, it has been fiscally responsible. They have abided to Section 1318 of the real property tax law limit, staying within unassigned fund balance being within 4% of the following year's budget, which, given the recent constraints with the economy and ongoing, outside factors, that has been difficult to do, but yet they have. And also that the district is in a great financial strength position. They have well-funded reserves, which we have gone over in detail with the audit committee. There is a temporary paper deficit in the capital fund that will be eliminated through permanent financing once the current ongoing project is finalized. And I also want to point out that there were no material findings in the management letter that we had. Virtually a clean audit. We did have some adjusting journal entries like we do in any audit that we do. And just as far as its upcoming GASB's, which is Governmental Accounting Standards Board, writes statements, and then we follow those statements to the letter of the law in the financial statements. There is one on leases that's coming up that I'm going to be working along with Gabby to do the best report, to do the proper reporting for that as well. And I'm not going to go into anything in any more detail. However, I'd be open and happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Justin, if I can just ask you to just also, there is an item, so what you'll see on our fiscal portion of the consent agenda is obviously to accept the reports of the external audit, and there's actually a resolution, the second item, with respect to...
Insurance.
Yep.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So, as you all know, about over a year ago, the district realized some flooding in the area and had over $2 million in repairs and maintenance related to that flooding, and was awaiting insurance funds from that flooding. At June 30th, 2022, those funds had not been yet received. So therefore, a budget amendment to increase that revenue would not be able to be done until we knew for sure that the insurance funds were going to come in. It's one of those situations where you aren't 100% sure you're going to receive those funds until you actually receive the funds based on the timing of the insurance company. So in either late July or early August, shortly before I arrived here in the middle of August for the audit, the district received the funds for the insurance claim for those expenses, and therefore the resolution that you guys will be discussing.
So it's a retroactive resolution to increase the budget from last year related to what would appear to be an overspend on the budget, which is directly related to Hurricane Ida expenses that we received insurance recovery funds for.
That's 1002. That's item 1002 in the amount of $2,134,982.
Thank you.
And again, had to be done retroactively because of the timing of the receipt, and is reflected in this report.
I can speak as, I know Chris isn't here with us, right, who is the chair of the audit committee, so thank you to Justin and his team. We actually had a great audit experience this year. It was smooth sailing. We got our reports timely. We were able to review everything and be able to get all of our reporting up to the state timely and in anticipation of the deadline the end of this week. So thank you to you and your team.
Oh, thank you.
And we appreciated it.
You're most very welcome. I look forward to a long relationship with you. Thank you.
I had a question from section 10. Should I ask it now or when we get to it later?
Related to the audit?
Just, related to something in the audit report.
Sure.
Does it matter? Oh, I was just looking at the summary on page 9, and I just, sorry, the
school instruction letter?
the audit
first one?
report, sorry. The third attachment on the
Okay.
audit report.
So got it. Thank
Sorry
you.
about
No,
that.
that's okay.
Forgot that there were multiple things. Just paging down, I was just, this summary, I was, here we go. I read in the notes, just under expenses, I read in the notes about the pupil transportation and the school lunch program going up because of COVID. And I'm just wondering, in terms of instruction, just curious what the difference from last year to this year was
Okay,
for
because of the
instruction.
large decrease, right? So this
Yes,
is
yeah,
actually.
exactly.
So this scheduled statement of activity, summary of changes in that position, this is for the district-wide as a whole.
Sorry,
not-
Justin, which page are you referring to?
Page 9?
Number
you.
9, under expenses, there's 6 items.
Right, so there's a large decrease in instruction within that. So this is directly related to a decrease in the liability on page 14, other post-employment benefits. So this page 9 reflects the changes in the summary of activities, changes in that position, which is a district-wide, on a district-wide basis, which, so on the in the fund financial statements, on a short-term basis, in the general fund and the general fund budget, we then convert that information to long-term based on those governmental accounting standards statements that I had mentioned earlier.
Okay.
One of those statements requires us to record in the statement of net position on page 14 a very large liability related to other post-employment benefits.
Got it.
And this liability represents the amount the district will have to pay for retiree health insurance over the next 30 years. However, the district only has the ability to fund the next 12 months. Having said that, this liability actually had a large decrease from June 30th, 2021 to June 30th, 2022, which is reflected on page 9 and is the biggest factor in that decrease in the instruction in that instruction line that you're seeing there on page 9.
So it's really a decrease related to the liability that we have to record, that we cannot fund, that we really don't know because it's based on an actuary calculation of post-employment benefits associated with our retirees, but because it's related to your staffing predominantly,
Okay.
it falls under the category of instruction. So when
Got it.
that liability decreases and you're looking at the snapshot of the district-wide financial operation, that's where it translates and it falls into, and it looks like yeah,
Big decrease, yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
Just to give you an idea of the volatility of this number, on page 58 within the notes of this financial statement, it gives like what the current discount rate is that the actuaries were using, and then what the swing would be if they changed that just by 1%. And based on the current discount rate, the liability is $157 million. If they increase that discount rate they're using, it actually drops to $133 million. So they're using a different discount rate every year based on the historical trends of the last 5 years.
Okay.
So based on this previous year that we've had in the markets, I think we're going to see this net then again jump up because they do take into account
Got it.
yes.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay, thank you for that.
You're welcome. It scares me every year when I see it.
Yeah, it's a
for the
tough. Once you get an actuary involved, it's a really tough thing to.
Other questions or comments by the board?
I did just want to echo quickly Justin's sentiment. So I just joined the audit committee this year. Callie, that was a fantastic question. We spent a lot of time on that in the committee. But I was definitely extremely impressed by, Justin and his preparation, the work that he did, and, the sentiments towards Gabby's team, that he relayed. Obviously, it's a new relationship, everybody working together for the first time. But the accolades that were passed along to Gabby and Kathy were frequent and, hitting on a lot of comparisons to other districts and how far along our process and timeliness and just attention to detail is. So I appreciated that feedback and wanted to make sure the board could hear sort of how detailed that was woven throughout the evening. And the second thing to note was I really appreciated the robust conversation at the audit committee. I thought our community members, I know you're talking about we have a couple more committees looking to add facilities and technology, but just letting the community know how helpful that is. The members from the community on the audit team had some really valuable questions, prompted a lot of great conversation. So it was just a great experience, and I appreciate just all the work that everybody did to get to this point. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
And I just wanted to make one other comment, since this is, you're coming into this brand new for the first time this year, and having served on the audit committee before, there's a lot of consistency in those sentiments that have been reflected back to the business office for a long time. And it's very heartening to hear, with a fresh new set of eyes coming in, to see all of these same procedures that everyone's seeing the same exact thing. So there's a very, very steady, consistent, report of all of our books being in great shape and of the work that the business office does. So thank you to both sets of teams for all of the work you did, and the audit committee as well.
Thank you.
Well, kudos all around, and thank you. None of this work is easy. It's very tedious, and there are a lot of unexpected things that pop up in the course of it, and so it is greatly appreciated, the time, energy, and effort that is put in by all. So thank you very
Great.
much.
Thank you, and I look forward to working with you again this current year. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay. Now, the book talk.
You need your,
Well, I will, I'll pull it, but just so the audience
for
can see.
Nicole's purposes.
Vanna has our book here.
Okay, so I will not be an active facilitator in the discussion. I'm just going to sort of review the protocol that we'll use, which is based on the final word protocol that I shared with the board in the Friday report. So each of you will have an opportunity, whoever goes first, to share a particular piece from the text, read it aloud, share where it is, and then talk about why that piece stuck with you. And then everyone else around the table will have a chance, the board members around the table will have a chance to comment on that. And then once everyone has commented, we go back to the original person who then makes a final comment. That's the final word. So, any questions on the protocol? And we just repeat that for everyone in the group. I don't think we need the timer, although I could borrow Lauren's timer, since it's a familiar noise, but if we seem to be going off the rails, I'll jump in. But any volunteers to begin?
I have it's one thought, but there are a couple of passages from page 190 to 193. And the subject is about traditional methods of education and lecturing versus active learning. So a couple quotes from page 190. The middle paragraph, rethinking needs to become a regular habit. Unfortunately, traditional methods of education don't always allow students to form that habit. And then jumping to the bottom of page 191, the author talks about, despite students enjoying lectures more, they actually gain more knowledge and skill from the active learning session. It required more mental effort, which made it less fun, but led to deeper understanding. Going to page 192, they talk about a study, and it says, on average, students scored half a letter grade worse under traditional lecturing than through active learning, and students were 1.55 times more likely to fail in classes with traditional lecturers. Lectures aren't designed to accommodate dialogue or disagreement. They turn students into passive receivers of information rather than active thinkers. And then I'll just sum up my quotes here. 193, it says, lectures are not always the best method of learning, and they are not enough to develop students into lifelong learners. If you spend all your school years being fed information and are never given the opportunity to question it, you won't develop the tools for rethinking that you need in life. So these passages jumped out at me because it made me think of the RIE commitment. And in the section where it says to students, where we provide the necessary support for the students to become socially responsible, caring citizens who can, and this is the part that really resonated, think critically, communicate effectively, collaborate, and creatively solve problems in a diverse global environment. It seems like, you know, when you're lecturing and you're just receiving information, it seems harder to achieve that area of the RIE commitment. So that's what resonated with me when I was reading those sections.
So jump in, everyone has an opportunity for some feedback, and then Callie will wrap it up after that.
I think we've seen that, certainly with the growth of the academy over the last few years, and the interest of the students and of the teachers and of our professional learning that's taking place with our teachers, not just in the academy, but throughout the district, who thinking about how even that professional learning is provided to teachers, where they themselves get to be much more active participants as opposed to the sage on the stage. And I think it is, I just think of myself as a learner, as we all know, I have my own areas to develop as a learner and a receiver of information. I am much more appreciative of active learning as opposed to, just having to really focus. And I think that speaks to certainly to younger kids as well as to all the students.
I am green. Look at that. So I actually had underlined quite a number of the same lines on each of those pages. And I think, obviously, I agree with what your connection is to the RIDE commitment. And we've talked for many years now about instilling more active learning in our classrooms and with our teachers. And I think the challenge is that it's uncomfortable to move away, not just for professionals, but sometimes for students and sometimes for families that support those students, because it's such a different approach to what you're used to. And I think that's where the rethinking piece comes in so strongly, is that mental flexibility that is mentioned throughout the book, and being able to foster that. And some of this data is actually, it's quite impressive to see the difference in how students learn, but they also don't like it, which makes it feel like it's not what is going to help them learn, but in actuality it is. So I think as you're talking about those, I think this is amazing, and then I think, how do we do that? and we've been fostering and it's a slow build, but I think that those are the pieces that have been sort of the challenges over time in bringing that more and more, making it more pervasive in our classrooms.
I mean, if you think back to spring of 2021, was that it? There was no ability to be anything other than the sage on the stage. So for all of the work forward, there was a huge pause and a huge reshift. And then now, the proverbial gates have reopened, and so everybody can go back, and it's really drawing attention again to the benefits of a different way of thinking about instruction and learning for both the student and the teacher. And I think as far as we went, there was a big stop. It will take a while again, because everybody's just, I'm only one person in the world, and every so often you stop and you think, wait, are we really okay? We're back? We're good? And then, so that shift, that restart, that pause, it's going to take a while for us to really get there. But again, books like this and data like this is so helpful in really propelling people forward.
I feel like those passages, I also had a lot highlighted, and I was thinking about them, and something that came to me was the math and focus, and sort of the shift that the process that took place by the district, teachers, parents, collaborating, coming up with a new curriculum, and that curriculum is so purposefully multisensory, tactile. There's so many elements to it for those younger learners, and it's going to be growing through, we have the math committee working to grow that further through the system, but that idea of to cement ideas, to really come at it from different angles and try it, and that transition has been uncomfortable for some parents or, in the teachers that required so much professional development and getting everybody on board, but you're seeing, we'll be able to see the data with NWEA soon of, how that is working, but those were great passages to highlight.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of the comments. And, you know, it's interesting to focus on I guess, the comfort many people take in sort of being told, you know, what you're supposed to think or what the answers are or this and that, and that you know, the uncomfort level that can be. I don't think that applies to everyone, but that's, you know, for many people, that's the case. And, you know, when you get uncomfortable, but I think there's many passages in the book beyond that just point that the uncomfortableness is where you learn, or learn more. It's not that you don't learn from these.
Okay. So when I read it, I thought examples, Jane talked about the academy where we see the active learning, and I was thinking project-based learning, which I witnessed when my children have engaged in those activities, and then Kelsey mentioned Math in Focus. I think, so we're seeing examples. I think the challenge is, you know, with the right commitment is how we put that into action. And I will say, in the newsletters I received from the middle school, the RMS Insider, I think it's called, and then I think it's Suzanne's Gems that she's...
Garnet Gems.
Garnet Gems. I mean, there's a lot in there about critical thinking. It's really reinforced in those newsletters, and as a parent, it really took notice of that. And so I'll just, the challenge is, you know, I think we all agree that the active learning is so effective, and how do we translate that into the classrooms? And I know we're on the right path, but I think that's where the work kind of lies for us, so.
Okay, thank you, Callie. Who would like to go next?
I'll go next. I managed to put the book in the wrong place, so I don't have it here. But the magic of the internet and the fact that it's a very quotable book, it was pretty easy to find some passages that could pull out from the things I had seen in there. And so there's a pair here that I think present an interesting dichotomy. So one, psychologists have long found that the person most likely to persuade you to change your mind is you. You get to pick the reasons you find most compelling, and you come away with a real sense of ownership over them. In the other passage, when someone becomes hostile, if you respond by viewing the argument as a war, you can either attack or retreat. If instead you treat it as a dance, you have another option. You can sidestep. Having a conversation about the conversation shifts attention away from the substance of the disagreement and towards the process for having a dialogue. Now, the second passage is obviously more talking about sort of, you know, interacting in the world with people you disagree with and things, but I think putting that passage together with the first in the context of education is interesting. The first passage, I mean, another way to say it is, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. Ultimately, people have to, you know, choose to do this, but you're in the business of educating kids and, of course, getting them to how do you make them more open to being able to do that, which I think is, you know, where you go to the second passage in terms of, and that's the trick, that's the art of the teaching, but knowing this and not saying, okay, well, this is how you have to, because even within this, there's a tendency, well, okay, well, this is how you think right, you know, so you need to think this and you need to challenge and stuff like that. And it's going to work with some kids, but it's not going to with others, or they're going to resist or push back, or parents who are like, why are you doing this? And so then looking for those other tools to, you know, again, create that conversation, create that dance that hopefully some people will embrace it right away, some people may take longer, but, you know, continually present that water and hope they drink.
Thank you, Tom. Feel free to jump in.
So I think actually Jane and I had a very brief conversation about this concept earlier, like randomly. And that the section of the book that comes from, I think, had a lot to do with, I think it was something interviewing, I can't remember the name of it, but, and what struck me about it was the idea of having that conversation with someone, giving them the autonomy to make the decision themselves, but helping them discern and look deeper beyond what would have been the first reaction you have when someone says, why? So instead of, and I think there's another section in here somewhere that talks about, instead of asking why, ask how. So how do you get to those different layers of how you got to that, why you feel that way? or why you respond that way. And there was a lot of very interesting examples of how you can break down some barriers between people who have a very opposite opinions about stuff when you approach it in that way. So I thought that was a particularly great concept, not just from an educational standpoint, but from a parenting standpoint of trying to even, engage with your kids as they get older and are searching for that autonomy, and how do you help them discern and better understand what all that means when they make that decision, a single decision.
That just makes me think of project-based learning, and I remember one of my children had a teacher, and at back to school night, she talked about project-based learning, and she was, I think, in like the third cohort, and she was talking about how nervous she was about it, but she had heard so many good things about it from her colleagues that she just had to try it. So it was out of her comfort zone, and she knew this was not going to be natural for her, but she just, with the support and just here, I think that's, sometimes the best is when your colleagues, do something and talk about it. You can see the enthusiasm. She thought, well, if they can do it, then I can too. And I thought that was really interesting and very honest of her to talk about at the beginning of the school year about how, nervous she was. And then at the end of the school year to see her face, glowing when she said it was, the best lesson that she had done in her many years here at the school district, so.
I was just going to say, it's on page 147 where it says, the goal isn't to tell people what to do, it's to help break them out of overconfidence cycles and see new possibilities. And I think, when you talk about leading the horse to water and making him drink, and then you think back to what Callie was talking about with the active learning, right? It's that idea of just putting the information in front of you, especially when you think about, in a math lesson, and you're trying to help kids understand a concept. So many, especially younger girls, will say, I'm just not good at math, I'm not a mathematician. And so it is that idea of an active learning or presenting the information in such a way that they've never been exposed to it or had the chance, and you break that overconfidence cycle where they say, oh, I can do this. Actually, this is okay. And it is that excitement of the thinking differently, thinking again, reframing how you think, how you see yourself to be able to be your best self is the goal that we want for all of our kids.
And I think counterbalancing that is sort of the world that we currently live in, where a lot of the older kids who have access to technology, instead of rethinking or overthinking it, they put in what is the answer, and something pops up, and then that is the answer. And I think that we're in a moment in time where these concepts, they're always important, but for the youth that we are thinking about, it's just very important to open up their eyes to these concepts, because it can become, so black and white and quick, as opposed to the process of getting that active learning of thinking through it, questioning your assumptions, how, asking the right questions becomes really, really important.
And it's funny you bring that up, Kelsey, because as I was reading this, I said to my 8th grade son, I said, when I'm done, you're reading this. And he's like, oh, really? He's like, Mom, you're on the board, not me. And I said, no. I said, this is the kind of thing. I said, I've already read it. So first, that was the first accusation. I was like, I'm reading it. I'm going to have it done. I don't need your Cliff Notes. I said, but this is such a great way to think about thinking. And 13-year-old, 14-year-old minds are questioning everything, and what a great opportunity for him to think about how others think. And there's this whole thing, and it's very timely, about the Yankees and the Red Sox, and with the Yankees playing tonight, and I think there's a lot to be learned for the teenagers as well. Yep.
Yeah, I think, all of these comments just reminds us of the patience that we have to have in applying these things, even if sometimes the easiest answer is just read it. But yeah.
right, I'm happy to go next. First of all, I enjoyed the book, so thank you for the recommendation. And I couldn't help thinking, it's a good idea to get my kids to read it, Jan, I like that. But I was also thinking of the team, the leadership team working on, critical thinking and bringing it, this RIE commitment, and especially Chapter 9, which focuses, there's just a lot of very, I found to be just really targeted feedback to a classroom and to teachers and how to bring out really a critical thinking concept. So I really enjoyed that. But the point I'm going to focus on right now is this idea of binary bias. And that was something that struck me just as a tool for myself. And then really for our students, really to really prompt this critical thinking. So it starts at page 165, but it says, presenting two extremes isn't the solution. It's part of the polarization problem. Psychologists name this binary bias. It's a basic human tendency to seek clarity and closure by simplifying a complex continuum into two categories. An anecdote is complexifying, showcasing the range of perspectives on a given topic. And it goes on to quote an experiment that was done where two people who had extremely divisive views or different views on topics such as gun control, abortion, they were basically given two different articles to read and then come together to discuss how their positions changed. So they said, when you frame the gun control not as an issue of two extreme positions, but rather one involving many interrelated dilemmas, it helps people rethink their views. They reconsidered their positions on divisive issues like affirmative action and the death penalty. When people read the binary version of an article, they would defend their own perspective more often and show very little interest in their opponents. If they read the complexified version, however, they made twice as many comments about common ground as they're on their own views. They asserted fewer opinions and asked more questions. And at the end of the conversation, they generated more sophisticated, higher quality position statements. And both parties walked away more satisfied. And I think this area really did resonate with me because I see Red Sox, Yankees would be a great example. People that sometimes when you're pitted against an idea, it can become very binary. And reading through this really helped me kind of even think about some opinions that I have that I can tend to be binary on, and really trying to help me realize that how truly complex most issues are, and how, through the book, there's a lot of weaving in of finding common ground as a way to be an active thinker. And I think in the world that we live in, it is so important. There seems to be a lot of polarization on a lot of things, and kind of coming at it from this framework of not saying black and white, but really meeting in the gray and discussing that and understanding it and nuancing it, which, going back to Callie's, where she started, that's more difficult. It's kind of sometimes easier just to say, I always vote no, or I always vote yes. And I really liked the way they framed that out in the research sort of kind of that went behind this idea of how important it is to understand that gray area on especially kind of these divisive issues.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, especially for the world we're in right now. The binary and black and white versus shades of gray, of course, has always been important, but it seems like it's more of an issue now as we are in this soundbite, create straw men and tweets type of environment that we're in, and just trying to, again, someone who can articulate it in those types of terms as we have this trend that we've been clearly as a society going in the last 6, 8, 10 years, and how do we get out of it?
Well, and like you said, I think this goes back to the critical thinking piece, and the layering that goes along with any particular ideal that might be out there that you might have just known because you have formed an opinion at a young age, or formed an opinion about the community that you're in, or just there's a lot of those that they mentioned in the book, and the idea of that digging deeper. and going through those layers, and that's a lot of what that critical thinking piece, and then being able to communicate about it too. So like it's pairing all of those things together that feels like it's really crucial for now, more so than maybe in even the last 10, 20 years.
When I read this part of the book, it reminded me of a meeting, and I can't remember. We were all on Zoom, so it was probably 2 years ago, and there was an English teacher from the high school. I think his name is Ronnie Serig, and he had given the class assignment was empathy, and the students were on the Zoom and they were talking to us about their experience. And they were given characters that you wouldn't normally relate to, like someone on death row and some people that had done some horrible things. But the idea of the assignment was to look at it, like Kelsey was saying, common ground, or just put yourself in someone's situation and see why they got there, and then just to see what you could relate to with that person. So it made me think of that. And again, the critical thinking piece, but it's, exciting. As I read this book, there were so many times when things popped in my head of examples of when that we're doing this in the different schools. So I got a kick out of a lot of passages when that was some, ideas would pop in my head of like, oh, I've seen that. Oh, wait a second. That should be an example in this book.
Well, and that's where the materials become so important, right? It's that binary. You want to make sure that you're reading multiple sources. Where I get my news needs to be varied to make sure that I have that ability to think about, be exposed to, pause, and be reflective on my own belief is not necessarily the only belief, and how and why are others coming to their beliefs. It's through multiple sources of information and being open enough to know that they exist and they're necessary for you to know. Not necessarily to change your mind, but to just be better informed about all topics, whatever the topic may be.
And that prompts a memory to me of Curriculum Council last year when a team of teachers presented this library crosswalk course that's going to be rolling out, I think, in the middle school and the high school, or just the middle school? Middle school. But the exact purpose of that course was to really tie students' process of research in their social studies English through the library and understanding sources, and how do you verify a source, understand perspective of your source, have multiple sources. And so this concept of the binary bias, I think in our district, everything I've seen is really kind of encouraging in the classroom teachers to bring that complexity and understand that, yes, there are two sides, and there's a middle, and there's a wide, and there's a narrow, and that all exists. And let's talk about that, and how does that make you feel? And, kind of really not having things come, from one angle, but really just being open to that conversation. And so, I just appreciate the steps that we're taking in that regard.
So
Unless you're going to take mine, and then you can't.
I don't know, I might take yours. I picked several different, they aren't necessarily all grouped together, but I feel like they are all addressing a similar concept of, and so maybe I am taking yours, I'm sorry if I am. It falls under some of the social emotional learning types of
Let's hear.
areas, but there was a lot to choose from, so, okay.
I'm prepared for this moment.
Okay, so I'm not, because I feel like a lot of mine have already been taken.
All right.
So I'll start with, it's actually at the very end of the book in the actions for impact, and it's in the beginning too, but I thought this was a great summary of it. The idea of embrace the joy of being wrong.
What page?
Oh, sorry, page 252.
Got it.
When you find out you've made a mistake, take it as a sign that you've just discovered something new. Don't be afraid to laugh at yourself. It helps to focus less on proving yourself and more on improving yourself. And then I thought on page 201, there is a great graphic of judging yourself versus judging your work. And that then couples with, I don't know if I'm going to get the right page for it, that then couples with the idea of separating your identity from your purpose of a job. So there's the meaning and purpose, and then versus your identity. And
On page 230.
sorry, page
The one that I
230.
underlined. Yep.
Sorry. But then I also thought it tied into, the idea of listening more than talking. And I think these pieces kind of all come together and lead back to some of the things that we are trying to do from a communication standpoint. It's not just about telling people what you think, but it's about listening to what they think. So on page 156, it's kind of a large passage, but listening well is more than a matter of talking less. It's a set of skills in asking and responding. It starts with showing more interest in other people's interests rather than trying to judge their status or prove our own. We can all get better at asking truly curious questions that don't have the hidden agenda of fixing, saving, advising, convincing, or correcting, which my children love to do. Journalist Kate Murphy writes, and helping to facilitate the clear expression of another person's thoughts. When we are trying to get people to change, that can be a difficult task. Even if we have the best intentions, we can easily slip into the mode of preacher perched on a pulpit, prosecutor making a closing argument, or politician giving a stump speech. We're all vulnerable to the writing reflex, the desire to fix problems and offer answers. A skilled motivational interviewer resists the writing reflex. Although the people want a doctor to fix their broken bones, when it comes to the problems in their heads, they often want sympathy rather than solutions. So I felt like a lot of these pieces all fit together because in a lot, and where I'm seeing this play out in what we're doing here as a district is not only the emphasis on building up supports around social and emotional learning, but also in what we're doing from a school counselor perspective, specifically in the middle school and high school, as kids are heading into figuring out what comes. There was also a whole section on stop asking children what they want to be when they grow up, which I think is very wise, because it narrows what they can answer right away, and it closes off, and it sort of stumps the idea of that creative and open exploration of, well, I really like to take pictures, and I really like to snowboard, or, and then things that can grow out of those interests rather than pigeonholing into, well, I need to be a doctor or a lawyer or, CPA or teacher or whatever the case might be. So it felt like those different pieces all came together to kind of reflect the necessary support to those broader whole child learning concepts.
That was a lot, Jen. It was
Sorry.
a lot to take in. It's really good. I'm trying to think of what you
It was definitely more than one passage.
So
I'm
good.
sorry.
So good. I didn't know if the timer was going to go
theme got me
off.
going. Sorry.
But I feel like what struck, I'm going to go back to kind of the some of the earlier points on this idea of like revision and revising, and you had called to this page 201, like this visual of this idea of as students in or as ourselves, as all of us, when you have an idea and it starts to kind of go the wrong way, so you have a writing assignment or whatever it is, you can go down the path of just all of a sudden being like, well, it's not what I want, and this is terrible, and it, goes in the trash on the visual, or, this idea of, okay, well, I started here, it's not where I want to be, I can work on this and I can make this better, and how can I adjust it, and how can I, revise and rework? And that's such an important concept for a life skill that I think, I loved that part of the book as well, kind of going through how to encourage rethinking, rewriting, revising, and thinking of that as a strength and a positive and a growth process. So I love that you called that out in there.
And at the end of that chapter, it says, ultimately, education is more than the information we accumulate in our heads. It's the habits we develop as we keep revising our drafts and the skills we build to keep learning, which ties right back into where we started with Callie and then with Tom, that it's opening up those gates for kids to be able to think and access and develop through time. And we're fortunate that we have as much time in the system to be able to build with our kids their skills and their knowledge over time.
I'll just talk about one passage. You were talking about on page 156, listening well is more than a matter of talking less. It's a set of skills in asking and responding. And then at the end of the next paragraph, it says, a skilled motivational interviewer resists the writing reflex, writing like R-I-G-H-T-I-N-G. Although people want a doctor to fix their broken bones, when it comes to the problems in their heads, they often want sympathy rather than solutions. And this actually made me think a lot of my high school child who, comes to me and starts opening up sometimes with, seemingly some big problems that aren't that big. And I immediately go into problem-solving mode of, oh, you should be doing this and this. And then she gets so frustrated with me because she just wants me to listen and nod and acknowledge, like, that's really tough what you're going through. So a lot of this resonated for me as a parent, with a high school student, and the key of listening and not going into fix mode, just to take it all in. And I'm on your side, and yes, that is terrible, and that must be really hard on you. So I got a lot of that from putting my parent hat on as well, reading those passages.
Yeah.
I don't really have any more to add on that. I mean, you guys nailed it all. So I'm going to admit that I think that you guys have 360'd this one.
So the only thing I will, I think I'm supposed to wrap something up somehow, but summarize it. So the last word I will say is that when Kelsey talked about the revising piece, that actually, what prompted that what thought came to mind in my head was actually the introduction of the Readers and Writers workshop, because my kids that were fortunate enough to be still in elementary school when that was being introduced, that has a natural revision process built into it, which I think is one of the hardest things for kids to learn, that they don't just, put it all out there on the page and it's done, and that it's a work in progress, and that's the good part, rather than, oh, I have to go back and do it again. But they get acclimated to that at a very young age, and I think it's an incredible skill for kids to walk out of their school career with.
And that's really hard. I think back to when my daughter was in first grade, and Jennifer Monet, her teacher, wouldn't let her use pencil because of that piece, because instead she just wanted to erase and make it perfect, as opposed to do it in pen and then work through it again and make some revisions. So great.
The joy of being wrong.
Yeah. All right, Jane, you're up.
I managed to get through and still have a passage. That's a win. All right, so page 238. This whole section is about chasing happiness. That should come as no surprise with my interest in social and emotional learning. And says, people who look for purpose in their work are more successful in pursuing their passions and less likely to quit their jobs than those who look for joy. While enjoyment waxes and wanes, meaning tends to last. And then if you go to page 239, when we pursue happiness, we often start start by changing our surroundings. We expect to find bliss in a warmer climate or a friendlier dorm, but any joy that those choices bring about is typically temporary. Page 240, it is our actions, not our surroundings, that brings us meaning and belonging. And I think that last sentence, we talk about the climate of how people interact with one another, certainly, but there's also this idea that things and objects and that will bring me the joy, as opposed to finding the meaningful connections, finding the people with whom I share interests and passions and joy. And I know we're doing a lot of work in that space about helping kids to realize you don't have to go somewhere to find your happiness. You just have to figure out what it is that brings you joy, and then you will be happy. And I want very few things more for my kids than that.
It's a very good one.
Oh, thank you.
But so actually, as you were saying that, I looked to the very next page in 241, and there was a philosopher, John Stuart Mill, who he quoted in the book, and I thought this was very reflective of what you were just saying. And it's not just about the physical location necessarily, but other things. And that quote is, those only are happy who have their minds fixed on some object other than their own happiness, on the happiness of others, on the improvement of mankind, even on some art or pursuit, followed not as a means, but as itself an ideal end. Aiming thus at something else, they find happiness by the way. And that just struck me as kind of illustrating a lot of what you just said. It's that bigger, broader, outside of yourself way of approaching it.
And Jen, I went exactly there too, and it kind of brought me back to the beginning of the book when they were talking about astronauts and sort of this experience that they have when they come back from their first flight. And it says, you can easily see from space the connection between someone on one side of the planet to someone on the other. There are no borders evident. It appears just this one common layer that we all exist in. When you get to see an overview of the Earth from outer space, you realize you share a common identity with all human beings. And that, that basic connection that we all have, and it's not about how can I be happy, but how can we coexist in happiness, and broadening that perspective of our community, of ourselves is it's a tall task, but something to look forward to.
With the areas that you chose, Jane, made me think of a passage which I was actually able to find. And it's, when we're searching for happiness, we get too busy evaluating life to actually experience it, instead of savoring our moments of joy as we ruminate about why our lives aren't more joyful. Which, that last part, I think, is something that we all, especially in this community, in this life, can experience. And, it's just good to ground your bases and reflect on what you have and not necessarily what you think you want.
And that makes me think of how appreciative I am of the fact that we offer, and one of our goals is to provide multiple pathways for our students, and that we don't have a cookie cutter approach, and that we have enough funding and enough wonderful administrators and teachers that we create multiple pathways, and we have created the academy for students that learn differently. We have multiple clubs of different varieties, and sports and theater. And because when you talk to Jane about happiness and pursuing your passions, I just feel very grateful that my children are at a place where they are exposed to so many things, where they can find their passions, and that it's supported. All those different ideas are supported here in this district.
I will just say for people who haven't read the book that at the very end, they talk about this woman, Candace Walker, who works in the University of Michigan healthcare system. And it says, Candace was often the first one to console families when their loved ones went through treatment. She showed up with bagels and with coffee. One day, she saw a patient on the floor of an elevator writhing in pain, and the staff members nearby weren't sure what to do. Candace immediately took charge, rushed the woman into a wheelchair, and took her up the elevator for urgent treatment. The patient later called her my savior. Candace Walker wasn't a doctor or a nurse. She wasn't a social worker either. She was a custodian. Her official job was to keep the cancer center clean. Candace and her fellow custodians were all hired to do the same job, but some of them ended up rethinking their roles. When asked about it, she said, "No, it's not part of my job, but it's part of me."
It's certainly a mic drop moment. So I would say when, the comments about happiness, it makes me very happy that you all read the book every year. I was sharing with a newer superintendent about how this is something our board does every year, reads a book together and has a public discussion. And they said they actually read the book. I would say there's pretty strong evidence tonight that the book was read. So thank you all. I think you all know that we went through the same process over the summer with our administrative council, because this was our summer read as well, and had some really rich conversations at our retreat as well. So thank you for your great insights and comments and thoughts, and for reading the book.
I didn't get the Cliff's Notes version. Yes, and thank you for the protocol.
Yes.
All right, great. We will move on to the next part of our agenda, which is hearing of the public on non-agenda items. We welcome and encourage our community members to address the board at this time. Please come to the podium, state your name, address, and if you are representing an organization. To ensure everyone has had the opportunity to speak, please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. I am going to ask our district clerk to set up a timer for 3 minutes, so if you hear the timer, please wrap up. The board is here to listen. The public comment period is not designed to be a discussion. So please understand that we may not respond publicly to your comments or questions at this time. We take your comments seriously and may need more time to process and research an issue. We will ensure questions will be addressed by the appropriate staff member or possibly answered at a future board meeting. We will not entertain comments regarding individual students or district personnel, as these are protected under state and federal privacy laws. Please know that we take personnel concerns very seriously. On these matters, we would ask you to follow the appropriate administrative channels. As a reminder, the community may submit written comments at any time to the board by sending those to rcsdboard@ryschools.org. Anyone from the community, please feel free to come forward. Seeing none, we will move on to the consent agenda. Okay. Consent agenda general.
Motion.
Well, oh, so sorry, right. Motion to approve the consent agenda. Kelsey Johnson, seconded by Tom Stein. Consent agenda general. Within this section, we have our board goals. As you may recall from the last meeting, we did create an additional, well, what ended up happening is we didn't end up actually creating an additional goal. What we did was we took an existing goal, enhanced it with the themes and ideas that were presented at the prior board meeting, which resulted in the last goal under fiscal management, which reads, continue to meet the fiscal challenges of current economic conditions while evaluating and maximizing available resources related to the scope of the capital project. Additionally, there was just some tightening of language, so if there are any questions or concerns. Okay, great. All right, moving through the agenda. Consent agenda, fiscal construction. Consent agenda fiscal.
So Gabby, I just wanted to ask a quick question from some of the internal audits. So under the audit for purchasing and accounts payable, there's a section, the second observation that recommends updating our policy around renewal limits for current, I think it's current vendors. And our response was that it's not a requirement by the state, but I wanted to see if there was is there any other reasons that we wouldn't try to maybe look at maybe piloting or something like that around those?
So it's specific to professional services that we're talking about, which is not a bid, but it's actually a request for proposal around professional services. So there is no legal requirement that those have to be renewed on a 3 or 5 year basis like most of our other bidding. The reason why we opted not to adopt or revise the policy around that is for certain professional services such as legal or accounting, software, if you will, the continuum is really important. So if the policy were to be revised to that extent, we would then be forced to, every 3 to 5 years, to have to go out to bid on certain services.
I see. Okay.
Now, that's not to say that we don't. If you saw tonight, our external auditors was as a result of going out to RFP for auditing services.
Right.
So we do practice using RFP at certain times, but I feel that changing our policy to make it a requirement every 3 to 5 years is going to be more detrimental than it would help us.
Right.
Allowing us the freedom to use it as a tool when needed, but not require it.
Right. And that's makes sense now, because the one final comment was that it gives us the flexibility that we are looking for in those areas, so that makes sense.
Correct.
Thank you. And then one other question. In the risk assessment report, under the facilities assessment, it notes that we have a third-party vendor to conduct facility assessments. Can you just refresh me on what that is?
So at the middle to end of last year, we actually contracted with a service to come in and evaluate our facilities, knowing that we were doing so much work around capital project. We wanted someone to come in and kind of give us a review and an assessment of where we are with facilities today, where we're going with facilities, and making sure that we're meeting the needs of the investment that we're putting into the district, and protecting it, if you will. So Rob is still currently working with those folks to finalize that report, which will go to the Facilities Committee and ultimately to the board.
Okay, and that's separate and apart from a building condition survey that will be done, as a mandatory?
Building condition survey is a requirement every 5 years. Visual annual inspection is every year, but the facilities assessment that we engaged in was something that we chose to do, just knowing where we are today in terms of capital and facilities overall.
Great, that makes sense.
Any other fiscal? No. Any other fiscal? No. Consent agenda professional appointments? Consent agenda classified appointments? Consent agenda special education?
I had a question about that. In terms of the agreement with Blue Path Service Dogs, Suzanne mentioned this in her PO meeting about the service dogs a couple weeks ago, and I looked on, it looks like, could you just give me kind of a quick overview?
Aaron is going to give you
It looks like they go to the different schools.
And we have some photos of beautiful doggies.
Great. Funny you should ask.
Children.
So here's some pictures of what has happened. So we've actually partnered with Blue Path Dogs with the help of the police department. And so what they are providing to us this year is to our special classes at Milton Elementary. They're there once a week with those classes at the middle school in the SALT program. They're there once a week, and then in the high school, they're there for 60 minutes once a week for the community lunch. For the other schools, they'll be there once a week in alternating classrooms. So that's all for Midland, Osborne, and the middle school, additional middle school classes. So this way that they are in all the different classes. Really, the program is to train the dogs for working with students with autism, but certainly the therapeutic support that they provide to all of our students has really been beneficial. So we were able to develop a contract this year where we're meeting all the various needs, supporting their program and their mission and their goals, and then supporting what we would like as a district as well.
And the dogs are incredibly popular at the high school
That's what Suzanne
when they're
was saying.
here for community lunch. And Jane tried to bring her dog to become one of the therapy dogs here at school.
One day, I hope Ace will be lucky enough to be able to be a therapy dog and have a job and someplace to go.
So just a follow-up question, this is this expanding our contract with them? So in how many years have we had a contract with them? Did this come during COVID? Was this unrelated to COVID? And
Sure, so this
kind of
was
the backstory.
actually brought to us from Detective Gabe Caputo, so it
And
was
the
actually.
RIDE PBA.
Yeah, and
It
the
was a
RIDE
gift of
PBA.
the PBA.
It was his idea, actually, so he was able to get support from another local organization too, Eric, that the first year we had.
Rotary. Yeah, Rotary.
The Rye Rotary actually paid for us, much smaller program. And so now, over the course of last year and then expanding this year, it's 3 times how often we had them previously in the schools.
All right, thank you.
And Erin, will it expand to the special education classrooms in Midland and Osborne as well? I know they'll go through on a rotating, but kind of on the focused once-a-week schedule, or is that depend on just how many dogs they have?
So the reason why there's focused there's a focus for the classes at Milton, the 2 special classes there, as well as in the middle school, is because there are students with autism in those classes. So within the other special class, we have 1 at Midland. They're still at diagnosis, but that's not a focus of what they do. So they are a part of having the opportunity to spend time with the dogs as they are in the building.
So it would potentially expand if, depending on the students at each, over the years, depending on the students within the special education programs at each school.
I would say there's some
It depends,
interesting, potentially, but there's some interesting conversations happening in buildings. I know that a certain Osborne principal and Osborne school nurse have been lobbying to have their very own therapy dog at the building.
there only
So there have
one?
been, I think,
Sorry.
I think there are lots of possibilities moving forward.
Yeah.
And lots of interesting ideas.
And this program isn't dictated by, an IEP, an individualized education plan. We don't have this where we have to have the program. It's really just been such a fabulous partnership that the kids really get so much benefit out of it. Even our students, it's wonderful to see our students that are not able to express themselves verbally, and really to see them light up and be able to walk with the dogs down the hallway and everything is really amazing. So it's an amazing organization and program that they've offered.
I'd say Ace could also become one of the dogs the kids read to. There's a whole program that the dogs sit and the kids read to them, and it's great practice in early reading.
He loves to sit. It's great. I'll bring him in tomorrow for evaluation. All right, wonderful. So can we have a vote on the consent agenda? All those in favor? That is 5-0 because we have 2 absences. So on this evening's consent agenda, We have our insurance claims related to Hurricane Ida, and I just want to make sure we say thank you for the hard work on those significant impacts to our school, both to our building service staff as well as to Gabby for making sure that we were able to actually get those insurance payments, because as we are seeing now, it may not necessarily happen in a lot of instances, and so we're very fortunate that you and your team worked so hard to make sure that that paperwork and process happened and took place. The Midland PTO provided money for teacher grants and curriculum enrichment and through BOCES programs. We have an anonymous donor who has donated money for our basketball scorers table with $3,570 left remaining, and those funds will come from the district. Fantastic. The Milton PTO has donated money for classroom materials as well as for the 5th grade hip hop program. And for those of you who haven't had the opportunity to have a student go through the hip hop program, it is pretty cool. And Dr. Burnham, just letting you know, they do teach breakdancing as part of the program. So if you're free that day, you may want to stop by, see if you can
I
get
think
involved.
there's a law against that with my participation. Maybe Dr. Alm.
Oh, all right.
Might be interested.
Dr. Alm, I'll let you know when that's taking place, because I will tell you, it was definitely a highlight of my previous fifth graders' time.
I mean, I did catch Dr. Alm doing some kid and play moves not so long ago, but
Duly noted. Additionally, we have payments for ice time at Playland, and this is a great partnership between the Garnets Ice Hockey and the district to ensure that our student athletes are able to utilize very expensive ice time for the hockey team. We had the appointment of club supervisors for the middle school and the high school, and I want to take an opportunity to thank our teachers and our staff for supporting our students in this way. These are great opportunities for our students to connect with other students and the school community outside of the classroom, and it's not possible without the support of our teachers and our staff. We also have teachers working on curriculum writing to continue to enhance the district's instructional programs. We have our appointment of our grade level leaders and coordinators, which will also work to continue to enhance the district's instructional programs. We just heard about all the wonderful work of the Blue Path service dogs, and that was our robust consent agenda. So now we move on to presentation discussion number 2 for modified football update.
And I just want to thank Susan Reed-Delay for joining us. She'll be coming up to the table. We just felt it would be important to close the loop. At our last meeting, there were some concerned parents that we heard from about a lack of helmets at that moment in time for the modified program. And I asked Susan if she could join us and just give us an update on where we are. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the discussion and how we got to this point with support, definitely. So kind of just a brief timeline. I heard the external auditor talk about trends, and this was a unique trend that hasn't happened in our current coaching staff as time. Unexpected increase in high school level football participation, which meant obviously a reduced number of helmets available for modified football. Then obviously paired with the national football helmet shortage, made it impossible to purchase any additional helmets for the modified and with such short notice. So therefore, as you know, we worked to get loaner helmets from other school districts, and the reason why we partnered with other school districts, member schools in particularly Section 1 in this case, is because we can assure that they're certified helmets and that they were appropriate for our student athletes to use. This meant that 7 8th grade students and 17 7th grade students were offered a spot on the flag football team by securing the 7 loaner helmets from those local school districts issued there, or mentioned there, that allowed full participation for our 8th grade students, which obviously last year, if they participated, had a similar experience. So we came to agreement that we thought that was important if we could do that. It took about a week to a week and a half to secure those helmets, again, because everyone was in the same boat as us. The key piece and takeaway and where we head from here is the biggest piece from future planning. while we can budget for helmets and we can order helmets in a timely manner, excuse me, I think the key piece is to separate the modified versus the high school equipment. Therefore, the high school equipment would be separate. While it may be the same equipment, sizes do run differently as well. So logically, not just from a financial standpoint to make sure we have enough equipment for our modified, but also sizes. So case in point, this year I ordered shoulder pads that were smalls and mediums, because often if you look at what's left over after the high school picks through their shoulder pads, big, large shoulder pads are not going to do our middle school students justice. So it makes sense that we just separate it, we store it separate, we treat it separate, and we look at what that number is and budget accordingly. So again, high school equipment, for example, in this case, would be in our field house, stored and sent separately, and our modified equipment will actually be storing in our athletic storage here in behind the gymnasium, so that we can ensure that our middle school program isn't affected strictly on the high school numbers. So that's where we ended up. I think we're in good shape. We've learned a lot from this experience. It's been interesting to say the least, and we continue to forge forward. Tomorrow, the modified program will be playing a home football game here against Port Chester. We'll be hosting the Port Chester team, thanks to the RFA, with some pizza. Any questions?
Well, first of all, thank you for all your hard work. I know it wasn't easy to secure those 7 helmets, and I know you spent a lot of time, getting one from here and one from there and driving around picking them up. So thank you. I know that's greatly appreciated by the students and the families and the board. Just curious, the follow-up, the 17 seventh grade students, are they participating? I know that the idea was to form a flag football program for them. Is that going ahead?
Not all 17 are. I can't tell you today what that number exactly is, but feedback-wise, I know our coaching staff has created a Sports U page for those families as well. In addition to that, the feedback that I've received from the coaching staff is some of those 7th graders have improved tremendously, and they've actually seen and given that feedback, which makes me happy, because I know they've been resilient and in a tough situation continue to come out. Fridays, we're trying to continue that opportunity where there is flag competition with all the kids. So I'm hopeful that kids will continue to grow and learn some more.
And is it the idea, next year you said you're going to separate the helmets, modified and the high school. Is the idea hopefully to have 2 modified, I know it's looking ahead, but is the idea to have 2 modified teams next year?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate first of all, again, thank you for going through. I mean, it's great. I mean, obviously, unfortunately, we still have some 7th graders who can't, but I think, getting all the 8th graders on and considering what they went through last year is still an excellent result, and I know the community appreciates all the hard work you put in to do that. I think separating and designating the equipment, sort of by team to make sure that the teams can fill out makes sense. I assume that if there's excess, or because not enough people brought up for one, you could still swap back and forth between them, but you kind of got, great.
Absolutely.
Susan, I just one quick question, just to give and I don't want to put you on the spot if this is too detailed, but just to get a sense of when it says unexpected increase in high school level football participation, can you give us a sense of what
the number was?
Yeah.
Over 30 students between the JV and varsity level.
30 beyond
roughly.
what
we
typical
normally.
over.
Yeah.
Right, so what is the typical might be?
Between the high school level, JV and varsity 9 through 12 would be about 85 to 90.
And so
we're
30
hitting up
over
to
that.
We're hitting to 125-ish, a few teeter off, they start, they stop.
Got
So
it.
it's hard to determine
But I think I just wanted to get a sense of
Sure.
that, since, if we're looking at how the timeline of all this stuff, and looking at, obviously, kids aren't coming out for football until summer.
Right.
So, So I think it's just, it's a tricky balance to
It
try and
is.
strike
It
with
is,
all of
because
that.
you want to you do want to look at trends and where
Sure.
we're at, and that's what, we utilize our registration for, because case in point, helmets, for example, are over $400 a piece.
Right.
So you want to budget accordingly and hit a higher number, so that way you don't run into this scenario, but at the same time, I'm not going to come to the board and say, we need, to outfit 300 students at the high school level and have all this excess equipment with a huge budgetary responsibility associated with it, and helmets that have 10 years shelf life.
Right.
So, it's definitely tricky, but there's some ideas on the back end that, hopefully we can get a handle on participation and think about potential transfers in and what that might look like statistically.
Okay. Thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
on that, and the answer is, we're still figuring it out, and it's later down, that's totally fine, but, do we anticipate budgeting for like that larger overflow number for high school going forward, or more, more normal, or something in between?
So,
or-
right now, based upon our numbers of what we've referenced from 7th and 8th grade, so if we look at our current 8th graders that are participating and our current 9th graders, that's rounding out your JV numbers roughly, and your current sophomores and juniors, and you might have a piece in there, that is a little bit over, but taking that number and adding a little bit to it just to cushion it, I think is appropriate. And as you mentioned, equipment can go back and forth, especially sizes with helmets, but it's the shoulder pads and the other things that I worry most about our little guys with.
So is the goal to move back to the place where there were no cuts in football, just as you think forward?
Yeah.
Or is there there's a budgeting for the, the continued growth? There is a question of like, when we reach a point to which the funding has to maybe, be directed to other programs. So
Sure.
just that balancing act of maybe even starting, if there's starting to understand the expectations of the community around cuts, and if
Sure.
the growth continues at this rate,
Right.
it may be possible that, we can support a program of X number of high school kids and Y
Right.
number of modified, which is robust.
Right.
And if participation exceeds that, we would
Sure.
need to create, a flag football team, or, kind of that, creating that expectation in the community may also help
Sure.
if growth continues at this unprecedented
Right.
pace.
So two things with that. I think that you hit a couple things, but looking at growth, you're going to have spikes such as that, but I think that it would come back philosophically to the Board of Education and having a discussion of philosophically what our cost per pupil is. We always do the breakdown. So, what is our threshold, what is our gap, and how we divvy up our funds in the athletic budget.
And
So
and
that
I
would be
think,
deeper.
and I think during budget season, we'll be able to have a much better handle
Yeah.
on that when we know what our starting point is. We have the tax
Correct.
cap numbers and things like that, so
Right.
I think
And
we'll
if we ever
certainly
reach
be-
that point, we,
Yeah.
remember we talked, I kept mentioning kind of backwards design, because if we ever had to make reductions, it's usually at the upper level first and foremost, so that would be a discussion philosophically
Yeah.
if we got there. But I don't see huge spikes, but this was definitely one that, we didn't expect coming, and having participation is a good thing to have, right?
I didn't get a chance to say thank you publicly either, so just truly, thank you. It's,
Of course.
I think back to school, we can all appreciate how much the entire administration, everybody works, ramping up so many different things. So to have this going on and the amount of effort put in to go to, track down 5 different districts to piece together, and make it work for these kids. I know the parents were really appreciative, and, certainly as a board member, I see how much effort was put into that at an extraordinarily busy time. So just
Thank
really
you.
appreciate
I
all the work.
appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much, Susan, for all of your work and your creativity in the problem solving, which is one of the best things to be able to have at a time like that. And also, thank you for coming back this evening to
Of
help
course.
us. And Dr. Brin, thank you for, as you said at the onset of this presentation, for helping to close the loop. Because I do think having these kinds of conversations is really important for the community to understand how situations evolve and how we problem solve to make things in the best interest of all of our community members, and our student athletes are included, so thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone's support.
Always. Okay, so moving on to communications to and from the board. Any meetings that were held? Kelsey, we know we had the audit committee. I think we probably
We did,
covered
yes,
that.
Exactly. I think we
Okay.
covered it, but fantastic meeting.
And Jen will be looking forward to a policy soon.
Yes, we have a policy committee tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
I could feel the excitement. That must have been what it was. Excellent. Just for the board's information, at our next Board of Education meeting on October 25th, we will be tasked with the necessary work to elect the New York State School Board Association Area 10 Director. That seat is coming back up again. I will get those bios to you for your review. There are 2 candidates that are running, and so at our next meeting, we will conduct that vote. In addition, at our next board meeting on October 25th, we'll be talking about data, assessment data. It's going to be a wonderful evening, so hopefully you'll be able to attend. If there's nothing else, let's have a vote to adjourn our meeting. Tom Stein, followed by Callie Erickson. All those in favor? 5-0. We'll see you on the 25th.